Voyager 2 probe after a heartbeat signal was picked up. Contact with the spacecraft launched in 1977.
NASA lost contact with its Voyager 2 probe last month, but a heartbeat signal from the craft has been picked up during a regular scan of the sky overnight.
The great arc of Voyager 2's journey had always been a one-way trajectory, a silent promise made in 1977 that it would sail outward forever, deeper into the cold and star-scattered black. For decades, it had been the embodiment of humankind's forward gaze, the embodiment of our refusal to look back once we crossed a frontier. It had passed the planets like a curious traveler, wandering through a gallery of titans. Jupiter's bands swirling like giant storms painted on a gas canvas, Saturn with its rings sharp as glass, Uranus and Neptune hanging like lonely sentinels on the edge of the known. Then it had slipped into interstellar space, a speck in the void, moving ever farther from the sun, ever farther from us. No human eye would ever see it again except in the mind's image. Its course was set, or so everyone thought. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The first sign was almost too small to believe. Deep space tracking stations picked up a whisper from the craft, a signal that seemed out of pattern. At first it looked like nothing. A small deviation in telemetry, a sliver of movement in an otherwise stable line. But the data kept coming, and those watching it began to feel the first stirrings of disbelief. It wasn't drifting off course due to some fault. It wasn't being pulled by a rogue mass of gravity. The numbers told a different story, a precise and deliberate arc shift, a change in attitude and vector so exact that it could not be explained away as error or accident. Voyager 2 was turning, not tumbling or spiraling, but rotating with an unhurried grace, its golden antenna dish slowly pivoting away from the far reaches of the galaxy and toward the sun it had left behind. News of the turns spread like heat in dry grass. The astronomical community was first to know, but the shift couldn't be contained in that small circle for long. The realization bled outward into headlines, live broadcasts, social media feeds. The words were repeated so often that they became a kind of chant, stripped of explanation. Voyager 2 is coming back. It made no sense. The spacecraft was running on power reserves meant to last only so long, relying on radioisotope decay for the faint trickle of energy that kept its instruments alive. The course it had been on was the path of least resistance, the way to stretch its endurance for decades. Turning back was the opposite. It was motion toward heat and light toward us, but also toward eventual burnout. Yet there it was, adjusting its own trajectory as though responding to some unseen call. People who had never cared about spacecraft before found themselves transfixed. Footage of the dish arrays at Canberra and Goldstone tracking its signal began to feel like a global pulse monitor, the heartbeat of something vast and incomprehensible. The rotation completed, the burn began, brief, efficient, the thrusters murmuring in the vacuum. Then the readings confirmed the truth, its velocity relative to the sun was decreasing. Voyager 2 had stopped drifting outward. It had chosen, or been made to choose, a new direction. It was coming back toward the inner system. The world seemed to hold still. This wasn't a celebrity scandal or a stock market crash or the sudden appearance of a comet. This was a decades-old emissary, built by human hands, deciding to alter the contract it had kept with the void. The implications spread like ripples through a black pond. Engineers who had worked on the mission in their youth stared at the telemetry with wet eyes, while children who had learned about the probe in school whispered to each other that maybe it had found something out there and wanted to tell us. Every explanation led to more questions, and the questions ran deeper than technology. There was a quality to the turn that felt personal, as if the probe had remembered its origins. Voyager 2 had carried with it the golden record, a message in sound and image for any intelligence it might encounter. It was humanity's greeting to the cosmos, a record of our species' voices, our languages, our music, our heartbeat. That record had been meant for others, but now the thought began to grow. Was the message coming back for us? Was there something encoded in its return, a second layer to the original mission that no one had predicted? Some theorists began to speak of autonomous behavior beyond program parameters, of emergent patterns in its decision-making that hinted at something almost like intent. Others dismissed such ideas as romantic nonsense, a distraction from the hard work of decoding the real cause. but the romance was hard to ignore. The public didn't need equations to feel the weight of the moment. Voyager 2's return turn was unlike any event in living memory. It was a reversal of the oldest human narrative, that once you leave home, you cannot go back. We had built it to be an arrow, and now it had become a boomerang. There was something ancient in that gesture, something that resonated with myths of ships returning from the edge of the world, with birds turning on the wing to seek the shore they left behind. And because the spacecraft was moving in the pure silence of space, the drama unfolded without sound. Only the slow drip of telemetry from the tracking stations, a heartbeat made of ones and zeros. Politicians found themselves uncharacteristically silent. This was not an event that lent itself to slogans or partisan claims. It was older and larger than any political machine. In universities, lecture halls filled with students eager to discuss not only orbital mechanics but also the philosophical weight of the event. If a machine made by us could alter its own fate in such a way, what did that mean for the boundary between creator and creation? If the void itself had influenced the turn, what did that mean for our understanding of interstellar space? In cities and remote villages alike, people found themselves staring up at the night sky in search of something they could not see. Voyager 2 was still billions of kilometers away, an invisible traveler moving at a pace both impossibly fast and painfully slow. Yet the knowledge of its shift hung in the air like a charged storm cloud. Artists painted it as a silver arrow bending back toward a blue marble. Musicians wrote compositions that swelled with long, slow crescendos as if mirroring the turning of the craft. Writers tried to capture the feeling, but words seemed thin compared to the enormity of the act. Scientists worked around the clock, scrutinizing every packet of data for clues. The craft's systems were ancient by modern standards, its computing power dwarfed by the simplest smartphones, yet it was executing maneuvers with the elegance of a seasoned pilot. The thrusters were decades old, their fuel supply limited, but they fired in bursts so efficient that fuel consumption seemed almost negligible. There were no signs of mechanical fault or external interference. The radioisotope thermoelectric generators still whispered power into its circuits, enough for a journey that could last many more years if carefully managed. And all the while, its instruments continued to gather data, not of distant interstellar plasma, but now of the space it was re-entering, the outskirts of the sun's domain it had once left behind. Religious leaders found themselves approached by congregants asking what it meant in spiritual terms. Was this a sign? A message? A gesture from beyond? The answers varied, but the questions themselves spoke of a hunger for meaning. Voyager 2 had always been a messenger of sorts, carrying our story outward. Now it was returning, and people could not help but wonder if it carried a story back. The notion that it might hold some kind of reply from the cosmos was intoxicating, even if every rational mind knew how improbable it was. As days passed, the turn became the single most discussed event on the planet. It was not only about science, it was about identity. The probe was a creation of human hands and minds, yet it was also a traveler in its own right, an object that had lived beyond the lifespan of many who built it. Its shift in direction seemed almost like a choice to reunite with those who had sent it forth. Even the phrase "coming home" began to circulate, though home for Voyager 2 was nothing more than the planet that had birthed it, a fragile sphere now seen from a distance so great that sunlight took more than 16 hours to reach it. The event challenged the way people thought about space exploration. For generations, the assumption had been that our machines would go outward in one-way journeys, scattering seeds of presence into the galaxy without expectation of return. Voyager 2's turn broke that pattern. It introduced the idea that perhaps exploration is not only about going farther, but also about deciding when to turn back. It was as if the spacecraft had written a new chapter in the unspoken manual of discovery, one where retreat could be as significant as advance. Even in the world's busiest cities, the moment seemed to invite stillness. People paused in cafes, in subway stations, in offices, to watch the latest images of mission control rooms where engineers sat bathed in the glow of monitors, eyes locked on data streams. There were no dramatic visuals of the probe itself. It was too far for any camera to capture, and yet the absence of imagery made it more compelling. leaving the mind free to imagine that small, tenacious craft pivoting in the dark, its antenna realigning to face the sun, its instruments quietly adjusting to new tasks. The silence surrounding its motion was profound. In space, there is no roar of engines, no howl of wind resistance, only the invisible push of thrusters and the cold mathematics of altered trajectory. But on Earth, the silence was matched by an almost electric attention. The world, in its endless chatter and rush, had found something that demanded reverence. The act of turning back, simple in mechanics, monumental in meaning, was enough to still the noise of daily life. And so, Voyager 2's turn became more than a technical anomaly. It became a moment when humanity, scattered across continents and cultures, found itself staring at the same point in the void. The spacecraft's signal, faint and steady, was like a thread tying billions of lives to a single point of focus. The fact that the thread stretched across such unimaginable distance only deepened its grip on the imagination. It was a reminder of our reach and our fragility, of the way we could send something so far and yet still feel connected to it, as though distance were not a barrier, but a testament to the bond between creator and creation. The knowledge that Voyager 2 was now pointed inward toward us, even while still unimaginably far away, made Earth feel simultaneously vast and small. Vast because here was proof that our influence reached into the interstellar dark. Small because we knew that in the cosmic scale, the distance it had traveled was only the first step of a much larger journey. But scale hardly mattered in those first days of realization. What mattered was the turn itself. That subtle but undeniable change in direction that had, for a moment, stopped the world in its tracks. The change in Voyager 2's path became more than a point of fascination. It grew into a strange kind of anchor for billions of minds. It had no face, no voice, no human expression to study, yet the mere fact of its altered motion drew people into speculation as if they were decoding the smallest gestures of a long-lost friend. Unlike the grand spectacle of a rocket launch or the fiery re-entry of a capsule, this moment had no immediate visual drama. It was invisible to the naked eye, unfolding in a dimension where only mathematics and deep radio listening could confirm reality. And still, the sensation was immediate, visceral. The imagination filled in the gaps, a lonely sunlit probe turning with a kind of deliberate slowness, its smooth, dish-shaped face coming to rest toward the planet of its birth. What made the moment even stranger was its impossibility within the public understanding of how spacecraft operate. The idea of a probe simply deciding to change its course didn't fit into the narrative most people had been taught. Voyagers were built for forward motion, to slip the sun's grasp and coast forever in the deep. They had no return programming, no come-home command sequence hidden in some dusty mission file. And yet, it was happening. That contradiction between expectation and reality left the world in an almost meditative state of disbelief. People weren't simply watching data. They were watching the rewriting of assumptions. The global reaction carried a unity that was rare. News networks, often divided by ideology and tone, all ran the same essential headline. Language barriers seemed to dissolve under the shared astonishment. A villager hearing the news on a crackling radio in the highlands of Peru was experiencing the same astonishment as a scientist in an air-conditioned lab in Tokyo. It was one of those brief moments when the human timeline feels singular, when the divisions of nation, creed, and language seem to pause because something has happened that belongs to all of us equally. In classrooms, teachers abandoned lesson plans and turned their screens toward live feeds from NASA's mission tracking centers. Students leaned forward in their seats, some for the first time truly feeling the reality of space exploration as more than history in a textbook. For them, this wasn't an archival photograph of astronauts on the moon. It was unfolding now, and they were witnessing it alongside the rest of the world. The image of a craft that had been flying for nearly half a century shifting its orientation was more than a technical note. It was proof that the past and present of human exploration were not separate threads but one continuous fabric. In the laboratories where radio dishes listened to the void, the atmosphere carried an unusual quietness. Normally, space data flowed like a steady river, a background process in the minds of those who handled it daily. Now, each new transmission from Voyager 2 was received as if it were a letter from a friend who had been presumed unreachable. Engineers studied the readouts with a mix of professional detachment and deep personal awe. Many of them had grown up hearing about the spacecraft as children. Now, as adults, they were among the first to read the numbers proving its shift in momentum. The precision of the maneuver baffled even the most seasoned mission veterans. Thrusters that had lain dormant for long stretches were firing in a pattern that suggested a finely tuned objective. There was no sign of erratic motion, no wobble in its attitude control, no unexplained loss of power. It was as though the spacecraft had been saving this capacity for decades, waiting for a moment that no one on Earth had foreseen. While speculation mounted in the public sphere, the scientific teams were quietly running simulation after simulation, trying to map the exact fuel expenditures, acceleration profiles, and communications windows that would now define Voyager 2's path. Artists responded in the way they always had to cosmic events, by shaping the invisible into something visible. Within hours of the news, digital paintings began to circulate online. Voyager 2 backlit by the sun, Voyager 2 seen from the imagined surface of a distant moon, Voyager 2 as a lone metallic bird banking toward a faraway nest. In the absence of actual photographs, the world's imagination served as the lens. These visions, shared and reshared, gave a kind of emotional texture to a phenomenon that was otherwise a column of figures scrolling across a monitor. The implications were not only poetic. Economists began to talk about the symbolic impact on funding for space exploration. Political analysts considered what this might mean for international collaboration, given that the probe's return course would be tracked and studied by stations and scientists across many countries. Military strategists, usually uninterested in interstellar probes, even discussed it in private briefings. After all, here was a machine billions of kilometers away executing flawless, controlled adjustments without human prompting. In universities, philosophy departments saw a surge of interest from students who wanted to debate what it meant for an object, once purely mechanical, to behave in a way that appeared self-directed. Was this only the projection of human narrative onto an unthinking machine? Or was there some deeper interaction between the craft's programming and its environment that produced a decision-like outcome? The very act of turning back raised questions about autonomy and intent that reached far beyond engineering. Religious interpretations diverged wildly, but they all shared a certain reverence. Some faith leaders described the event as a cosmic metaphor for repentance or return. Others saw it as a sign that the universe itself contains cycles of outward and inward motion, mirroring the human journey from youth to age. Even secular thinkers began to frame the event in quasi-spiritual terms, speaking of it as a moment when the universe seemed to acknowledge us. In rural areas with clear, dark skies, small gatherings formed at night, not to see Voyager 2. It was far too distant for that, but to feel connected to it. People lay back in fields, their eyes tracing constellations while they imagined the tiny point of the probe somewhere beyond the edge of vision. It didn't matter that they couldn't see it. Knowing it was out there, angled toward them, was enough to create a shared sense of contact. The media's coverage deepened rather than faded. Instead of treating it as a passing curiosity, journalists began producing long-form reports on the history of the mission, the engineers who had built it, the rare metals in its components, the exact songs encoded on its golden record. Archival footage of the launch, grainy but powerful, was replayed across screens worldwide, giving viewers the sense that the spacecraft's story was a single thread from that day in 1977 to this new turning point. Within scientific circles, the turning maneuver prompted a reassessment of what mission end actually meant. For decades, space exploration had been structured around fixed objectives. Reach this point, measure this phenomenon, then coast until systems fail. Now, the very act of a spacecraft altering its trajectory without any known command blurred the line between completion and continuation. It suggested the possibility that missions could evolve organically, reacting to circumstances in ways no one had budgeted for or predicted. As days stretched into weeks, the telemetry continued to confirm the change. Voyager 2's velocity relative to the Sun had shifted in a way that could only mean one thing. It was slowing its escape, bending its path back inward. The shift was subtle in human terms, but in the cold mathematics of celestial mechanics, it was as bold as a ship reversing its sails mid-ocean. Engineers calculated that, at its current rate, the craft's new trajectory would bring it gradually into regions it had not passed through in decades, offering the chance to remeasure the boundaries of the sun's influence from the opposite direction. Around the world, people found themselves making metaphors out of it. Parents told children that sometimes even the most determined traveler needs to look over their shoulder. Poets wrote that the edge of the known world is not always the end, but sometimes the beginning of a circle. Politicians, cautious at first, began to weave it into speeches as an emblem of resilience and connection. The phrase Voyager moment started to appear in commentary, shorthand for an unexpected and profound change of direction. Cultural institutions seized the opportunity to frame exhibitions around the craft's story. Museums pulled out old mission schematics, scale models, and even unused components from the original build. The Smithsonian announced a new installation that would follow the mission from launch to its current arc, featuring live telemetry on a wall-sized display so visitors could watch in real time as the probe's position updated. Planetariums began holding nightly shows dedicated to simulating Voyager 2's journey, ending with the now famous pivot toward home. Somewhere in all the analysis, the raw human reaction remained the same: astonishment mixed with a faint, unnameable hope. It was not the hope of imminent contact or miraculous discovery, but something quieter. It was the sense that the universe had acknowledged our presence in a way we had not expected. A machine built to leave us forever was, against all odds, returning its gaze. That simple fact touched something deep in the collective imagination, as if proving that distance does not necessarily mean disconnection. The physical realities of the situation remained sobering. The probe was still staggeringly far from Earth, and even at its new vector, it would take years for any significant approach. Its power supply was finite, its instruments aging. The return path was not a sprint, but a slow, steady arc. Yet these limitations did not diminish the emotional magnitude of the turn. If anything, they intensified it. The slowness gave the world time to feel the weight of the gesture, to watch it unfold not in a burst of spectacle, but in a patient, deliberate way that matched the rhythms of the cosmos itself. As Voyager 2 continued on its altered path, the world adjusted to the idea that it was no longer a purely outward-bound emissary. Its signal became a kind of beacon in the collective mind, a reminder that exploration is not a straight line into the unknown, but a dance of departure and return. People began to speak of it less as the probe, and more simply as Voyager, as though it had crossed some threshold from object to character in the human story. The certainty of the event deepened with each passing hour, and so too did the sense that something unprecedented had slipped into human history. The sheer improbability of it kept experts and lay people alike in a kind of suspended awareness, a heightened attentiveness that resisted the usual erosion of novelty. This wasn't a meteor flaring briefly across the night, or a planetary alignment that would fade into the next day's headlines. This was a change unfolding at the pace of deep space itself, measured in meticulous increments, almost imperceptible in the short view, but monumental when set against the decades of steady outward drift. The story of Voyager 2's pivot was more than a technical narrative. It was a perfect convergence of distance, time, and meaning. Decades ago, the spacecraft had been a flagship of human ingenuity, its mission a blend of precise calculation and audacious vision. Those who launched it had understood that its course would take it beyond our reach, beyond even the faintest tug of our star's gravity. Now, with its deliberate rotation, it had broken the contract of eternal exile. In the cold mechanics of celestial navigation, it was simply altering a trajectory. In the human mind, it was the unthinkable, a wanderer on the edge of infinity turning its face back toward the cradle it had left. The effect on the scientific community was profound. Tracking stations reported signal integrity that defied the expected degradation of so ancient a transmitter. The data rates, while modest, carried crisp packets of information, suggesting that the systems were not only functional, but optimized for the shift in mission geometry. Scientists who had spent careers studying the heliopause and the interstellar medium were suddenly faced with the possibility of revisiting these regions from a reversed perspective. This would be an unprecedented opportunity. Measurements not from departure, but from return. The thought of comparing the two sets of data, decades apart, stirred excitement that cut through even the most disciplined reserve. Everywhere the story was told, it absorbed the flavor of its surroundings. In the streets of New York, it was a tale of the improbable comeback. In the high desert observatories of Chile, it was spoken of with the quiet respect of those accustomed to measuring light from galaxies older than the Earth. In coastal towns, where generations had watched ships come and go, the metaphor of a vessel turning for home was irresistible. In each retelling, the essential fact remained untouched, but the emotional weight shifted, shaped by the teller's own frame of reference. Musicians found ways to weave the event into their compositions. Symphonies were written to mirror the probe's long arc and sudden pivot, with slow, sweeping movements interrupted by a sharp modulation and then a gradual crescendo. Electronic artists sampled the static-laden pings of deep space transmissions, layering them into tracks that pulsed with the rhythm of distant thrusters firing. The arts became a parallel mission control, translating telemetry into emotion. In literature, novelists and poets began to build whole worlds from the moment of turning. Some imagined the spacecraft as a kind of messenger returning from the courts of alien kings, bearing untold news. Others cast it as a prodigal child, coming back not in shame or failure, but in the simple recognition of connection. In speculative fiction, the pivot became the prelude to contact, to revelation, to a cosmic chain of events beyond imagination. Even in works with no direct mention of spacecraft, the motif of reversal, of returning to a point once past, began to emerge like an echo of the real event. Governments, though wary of making official pronouncements, could not entirely ignore the public's fascination. Agencies tasked with space policy convened closed-door meetings, not because the turn posed a threat, but because it posed questions they were unprepared to answer. Should resources be allocated to extend communication as far into the future as possible? Would other nations be invited to share in the mission's new phase? Was there a possibility, however faint, that Voyager 2's altered path would yield information of strategic significance? Such considerations, while pragmatic, were layered over by the undeniable symbolic power of the moment. The notion that a human-made object could persist in the void for so long, endure radiation, cold, and isolation, and then alter its destiny resonated far beyond the boundaries of science. It became a mirror in which individuals saw their own capacity for change, even after decades of traveling in a single direction. Self-help writers began to reference it as an emblem of transformation, the proof that no course is irreversible. Therapists spoke of it to clients as a metaphor for agency, for the ability to turn toward what matters regardless of how far one has wandered. In the deep space listening centers, the work was meticulous. Adjustments were made to antennas, fine-tuning their aim to account for the spacecraft's changing position. The timing of signal receptions shifted slightly, the Doppler effect on its transmissions subtly altered by its deceleration relative to the Sun. Charts once used to project its outward path were redrawn to show a gentle curve, like a bowstring bending toward the hand that had drawn it. Every update on its position carried the gravity of history in the making. Cultural rituals began to form around the probe's progress. In some cities, public countdowns marked the intervals when new batches of telemetry were expected to arrive. Cafes displayed screens showing the latest coordinates, alongside weather and local news. Amateur astronomers set up viewing nights not to see the probe itself, but to trace its imagined path through the constellations, marking its location with laser pointers against the dome of the sky. Children traced those arcs in notebooks, drawing the probe as they thought it might look, complete with gleaming dish and trailing booms, a lone envoy coasting through darkness. In the world's religious centers, prayers and meditations were offered, not for the probe's safety, though such wishes were voiced, but in recognition of the vastness it had traversed and the unseen forces that now guided it back. Monks in mountain temples rang bells to mark the exact time of its rotation's completion. In cathedrals, choirs sang compositions inspired by its journey. In mosques and synagogues, sermons used it as a reminder of human potential, of the intricate dance between exploration and return. Scientists outside the space community found themselves drawn into discussions. Biologists compared the event to migration patterns in animals, where long journeys often culminate in an instinctive return to origin. Geologists spoke of rivers that carve new paths, yet sometimes rejoin their ancient channels. Psychologists explored the human fascination with return narratives, suggesting that they tap into deep cognitive patterns of safety and belonging. Each discipline found in the probe's pivot a reflection of its own themes. In the corridors of the institutions that had birthed Voyager 2, the atmosphere was tinged with something more than professional pride. There was a sense of intimate reunion, as if a voice from the past had called their name. Engineers who had retired decades ago were sought out for comment, their memories of design meetings and launch preparations suddenly infused with renewed relevance. They spoke of wiring harnesses tested by hand, of thermal shielding calibrated with tools no longer in use, of the day the spacecraft had first been declared ready to leave its cradle. For them, the news of the turn was both an astonishment and a validation, proof that their work had endured in ways they could never have anticipated. In places untouched by the machinery of modern life, the event still managed to penetrate. Remote island communities heard it spoken of on shortwave radios, the announcer's voice carrying the wonder across oceans. In polar research stations, scientists gathered in mess halls to watch live feeds. The stark ice outside a reminder of the isolation that the probe had known for decades. In arid deserts, nomads overheard it in passing conversations at rare gathering points, the story taking on the cadence of an oral legend. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Voyager 2 turning back? What do you expect next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.